I want to bring in Jeh Johnson. As a former Homeland Security Secretary, how alarming are these connections between the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys? The fact that there was that meeting, they were in the garage right underneath where we're sitting now, the night before, that they were planning, that they were talking to each other. Both of those groups now have been charged with seditious conspiracy to overthrow the government. So very serious felony charge, at least that accusation. What do we know about the way Homeland and DOJ and other agencies track these extremist groups, these domestic terrorists?
Andrea, DHS, through its bulletins, has been increasingly sounding the alarm about these groups. I have to say, and this goes back to the discussion you were having a moment ago, I recall vividly the moment after that debate, that presidential debate ended, and there was such explicit discussion of the Proud Boys in that debate, that Proud Boy membership was going to soar right after that, and it did, in fact. Andrea, what I heard last night from that hearing, and here I'm in my role as former federal prosecutor, which I was over 30 years ago, the committee is very clearly making the case for the Department of Justice of a criminal act by none other than Donald Trump. The committee chair now uses the words attempted coup, attempt to overthrow the government in connection with Donald Trump. It's also notable that the Proud Boys have been indicted as part of a seditious conspiracy. It sounds as if the committee is making the case that Donald Trump joined in that seditious conspiracy. There is also the charge of insurrection, acts of violence against the U.S. government, as well as those who give aid and comfort thereto. In my judgment, this was the very definition of an insurrection. And then lastly, what I thought was notable was the use of the word fraud last night. Wire fraud, fraud by wire, television, radio, the very conventional federal prosecutor's tool for prosecution. And it seems as though the committee is now also trying to make the case that Trump and the people around him were engaging in some form of fraud in inducing people to commit these acts of violence on the basis of something they knew was a lie.
How difficult is it for any attorney general to potentially indict a former president of another party?
Well, it's unparalleled. It's unprecedented. But from everything I know, from what I've seen from public sourcing and from last night, I think we are within the realm of what an aggressive prosecutor would take on. I think there's going to be a lot more evidence that comes out through these committee hearings. And the Department of Justice at that point is going to have to make some really difficult decisions.
So, Clint, I've got a question for you, but I do want to hang on this for one more second with you, Secretary Johnson. Let's talk about what sort of evidence they would need to get to Donald Trump. And Donald Trump is notorious for not text messaging. He doesn't email. He doesn't really leave a paper trail of his own. He's reached through others. If you want to get a hold of Donald Trump, you've got to call somebody else and they'll put him on the phone with you. So unless there is some direct note-taking in these meetings, and we know from past reporting that a lot of those notes were ripped up in baskets or flushed down toilets, what would they need in order to directly link Donald Trump in a way that would make a criminal indictment stick, a prosecution probable or even gainable, attainable?
Well, you could see the committee starting to build that case last night by highlighting what he was told by his own attorney general. He was told by his attorney general, and it seems as though his own daughter concurred in the view that there was no evidence that the election was stolen. And so that is building block number one in the case that what Donald Trump was saying he knew to be false. Very often when you're prosecuting people such as people in organized crime, you're not going to have an email smoking gun. You're not going to have a handwriting. It's going to be eyewitnesses' testimony about what Donald Trump was told and what Donald Trump said.